Hello, everybody, and welcome to the interview room on this wonderful Tuesday evening. Woohoo! So grateful to see you. Tell me where you're at. I prepared a lot of stuff tonight, and I think we're going to have a good talk. Let's see who we got here. Cedar City or Cedar Park, Texas, home. Yeah, exactly. Kentucky, Dallas. I'm home too. Been a busy week, and we got a couple of great things headed your way. Alabama, go Bama. Ohio, New Jersey, Sacramento, Chile, Oxnard. Great town up in Sweden. Good to see you guys. Pensacola, great state of Texas. Hook'em Horns, North Carolina, Tulsa, where they catch bad guys. I know the one of the task force members up there on the Violent Crime Task Force. Mexico, ¿cómo está, amigo? Michigan, Ontario, Tupelo, Mississippi, Missouri, Brevard, Utah. Yes, Aggies, Logan, Canada, the Canucks. Love a good hockey game. Venice, Florida. Australia. Hello, mate. Arkansas. Woohoo! Johnson City, Tennessee. Great to see you, Johnson City, Tennessee. Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where they pack the can, the Boston Habit. And let's see. Clifton Forge, Virginia. Wow. The UK is here. Top of the morning to you in Ireland. I see you out there. Southern California, SoCal. So good to see you. Go Dodgers. Yes. They get lucky every once in a while. You got to love them. But it's this team you got to keep an eye on. It's this one here. Costa Rica, Michigan. Married a Michigan girl. And I married so far up, I just keep pinching myself constantly. She's such a great woman. She's the best thing that's ever happened in my life. Go Tigers. Yes, the Ozarks. Beautiful, beautiful area. Denver, Colorado. Got a niece that lives there. Great town. Altemus, Tennessee. Cape Cod County, New Jersey. Jersey girls are in the house. Portugal. Thank you so much. Seattle's in the house. Best fish markets around the world. Yakima, Washington. I hope that is my buddy Mike and some of the tribes up there. He's a great man. And Mike, shout out to you. Miss you guys. And congratulations on the new families. Shout out to our mods and everybody that's here this evening. We are so grateful that you're here. So, man, oh man, you know, Karen and I were talking we've today and over the last couple of days, and we've been, talking about how many things have changed for us in terms of the growth of the channel here. And, we thought maybe, every once in a while, it's good to just kind of do a one-on-one with our audience. We've had a lot of folks, asking questions about, things that, Karen and I can hopefully add a little value to your life tonight. And we're so grateful that you would even take the time to, to spend with us. We've got a lot going on in the Nancy Guthrie case, but also in the world and in other cases as well. So real fast, as a little house cleaning uh, industry and business, I want to give a shout out first of all to Chief J.D. Huff, who just recently retired from the Fruitland Police Department, working on the Michael Vaughn case. He and his team um, have just done an unbelievably amazing job. I felt honored to be behind the scenes, literally, even in this picture. But Chief Huff, congratulations on your retirement. Congratulations on getting the first suspect bound over in the death of that little 5-year-old boy. And I want to remind everybody, if you have information about the whereabouts of Michael Vaughn, it is still open in terms of the agency has not found him yet. And we just want to ask you to please contact the Fruitland Police Department and talk to that young lady right there on the right about any information you may or may not have in relationship to Michael Vaughn. So, Chief, enjoy your retirement, and thank you for trusting the Cold Case Foundation and our team. Another shout out, this was a picture taken before any arrest in the Maya Miliete case. This is Maya's family, and they had these really neat little masks that they were wearing, paying tribute to her. Well, her killer, I'm not even going to name him, is going to trial. They are now picking a jury, and it's her ex-husband. And also, I had an opportunity to help behind the scenes on that situation as well. And these are all successes that we in the Cold Case Foundation are just honored to participate in. And so hopefully we get justice for Maya. Her body as well is missing. So if anybody has information there, please call the Chula Vista Police Department and or the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, where a district attorney investigator will follow up with you. Please, Maya needs to come home. Her family, Richard, Mary, Chris, and of course, all of her brothers and sisters in this photograph, they deserve it. And so I will not forget them, and we will continue to seek justice for Maya Miliete. And in this corner, that guy right there with the suit is how we used to get to places. And I was just going through a couple of pictures, and I saw this one where you've got, home fries there on the concrete, and, us standing there about ready to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So not my first rodeo, which leads me into a weekend you're not going to want to miss. The Cold Case Foundation, we've got some really, really great things happening. We're involved in a lot of different things that the public has no idea. We have been behind the scenes on a lot of high profile stuff, but you've seen it on TV. But we're not out there running and gunning and telling folks, come look at me, in terms of the organization. However, we do have some really neat things cooking. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be able to talk about it. But you will hear it first on this channel. So I just want to kind of prep yourself, prep you. If everything keeps going in the right direction, we're going to have some huge announcements coming up. But I don't want to jinx it. But at the same time, I don't want to not prepare you if it does cook off here. And some of that's going to revolve around these knuckleheads right here. That's Dr. Larry Simons, Greg, Dean, and of course, Tight Pants. That's what we call him. But anyway, good stuff happening. So put your seatbelts on. And those of you that don't know this crew, Greg in the middle, who you'll be seeing soon here, was the chief of the behavior science unit in the FBI. And he is going to be here this weekend. So you're going to hear directly from the boss himself back in the day. He actually brought in Mary Ellen O'Toole. So we're going to have him here. Greg, I talked to him today. We were in a great meeting today, and he's going to weigh in on the Nancy Guthrie case. So that's going to be Sunday night here on the interview room. You're not going to want to miss that one. So that said, why are we here tonight, right? Just want to bring everybody up to speed on the timeline for Nancy Guthrie. The reason I mentioned the first couple of cases, as we started here, is because she's still out there. And what does that mean? We do not know if she is still with us, but I have to be honest, in my experience and my heart, I want to say she's still here, but my instinct tells me that she's not. And so if that means she isn't, what happens to an investigation, even if they don't find her body? And that's why I wanted to mention the first two. In those two cases, Michael Vaughn and Maya Miliete, they still have not found their bodies. So I want to give hope to not only in the true crime community that we continue to be responsible and start putting information out that, is locked and loaded correctly. But at the same time, I don't want people to panic that if, in fact, they do not find her body, that they can't put a circumstantial case together through other types of evidence. And unfortunately, we still have to deal with what does that mean with the sheriff if after today with the supervisors meetings and they step up and they say, Nonads, you lied about your resume, you lied about your experience, you unfortunately, are in a leadership role during this case, but you're out. Okay. And so if Nanos is booted, that's the angle I want to take tonight. What happens in this situation if the sheriff is ousted from the Board of Supervisors? Now, it is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to oust somebody who has been elected by the people, i.e. a sheriff. It is really super easy if it's a police chief. Well, it's not super easy, but it's much easier. Let me say that. We know that there are differences of opinions in terms of what the rank and file feel about him. And we also understand that, there's been multiple no confidence votes from the rank and file about him. Now, that does not change, though, the dynamics of the case. The evidence in terms of the doorbell surveillance video, showing the suspect on the porch, tampering with the camera, the blood, all of the information that's sent to Quantico, the mix sample that they're trying to separate now, possibly from multiple suspects. or suspect, and it's mixed into, a particular. Hang on, let me move my camera over so I'm not bumping into nonads. The arguments about private lab, Quantico, the political things, things that we have, really kicked around here pretty extensively with, our panels and our friends and, the many other experts that opine. Um, and by the way, just for the record, it's always, one of the things I always like to remind myself and others. We don't always get it right. And I think it's important to say that sometimes to the public because the public, you guys all expect it. I expect it, being a member of the public, that if a law enforcement agency steps up and says, hey, we got it all right, I'm very proud of my guys, i.e., Nanos, and then we discover that there are just so many problems that you got to put a zip code on some of them because you just have to, because there are so many of them. They're going to be mailed all over the world when a defense attorney gets to them. And so I think it's important to always, be humble, yet simultaneously recognize that what you do know, you do know. And I'm very proud of the panel that I've assembled and that have come onto the show to talk because they know a lot, and others know a lot, and you're going to hear you're going to hear another person weigh in this weekend. Actually, two folks. One going to be Greg, the other will be Dean, and they're going to come at it from a different perspective. I mean, they're going to come at it from not just being a profiler, but being the boss of the behavior science unit. And Greg was appointed by John Douglas, who you're going to see at CrimeCon. And John Douglas was, our executive director at the Cold Case Foundation. He's the emeritus now. He stepped down recently, and Greg took over, just like he did in the BAU. So you're going to hear it from, the horse's mouth, not me, but from Greg. And let me tell you, I spent about, 2.5 hours with him today in a meeting on something else. And we had a really dynamic conversation about his impressions. And I'm going to wait for that to let him reveal those on Sunday. And so it's important, though, to remember that just because, a politician is booted, hypothetically, does not change the dynamics of an investigation. All right? And that's kind of the angle I want to take here tonight because, we know that this guy has done a lot of different things. And quite frankly, he's done a lot of damage. And for anybody not to say that and to defend him in totality, now, I'm not going to throw the guy completely under the bus, but let's be honest about this. Even today, you hear statements where he's attacking the Board of Supervisors about turning a tip over to the FBI. Okay. I don't know about you, but that's where I have a problem with the way he manages. I have a problem with the way he treated his staff, a lieutenant who was running against him, how he isolated her, as a bully and isolated her so that she could not, take over as a sheriff. And she loses by 400 votes. But the bigger point for me is the fact that he politicized it so much that he isolated his staff. And he's done the same to the homicide group, the folks that may have been supporting her. This guy steps in and says, you, and you're out. And then all of a sudden, a Nancy Guthrie occurs. And it is reckless, as Caroline says. I agree. It is 100% reckless because he gutted the investigations division. And once he did that, many years of experience, and I'm not just talking years of experience, I'm talking practical experience where, when you show up at a crime scene and you see blood on the porch, there's a process that takes place for investigators to at least have a general knowledge, not a totality of knowledge, right? Because that's where you leave it up to the other experts to opine, not people that are in one lane, and then they play, different routes within that lane. Hey, what do I mean by that? Well, I used to work with an amazing dynamic evidence, some evidence folks. And some were trained in blood spatter analysis because they'd gone to school for it. And then there were others that weren't. What I really respected them, and what I respected solidly about them, was the fact that they knew what their lane was. And, I only know about blood spatter analysis because of all the murders that I've worked. But I would not step in a courtroom and put my hand up and say, by the way, okay, I'm a voir dire expert in blood spatter analysis. No. I know what it looks like because I've stood over dead bodies and I've seen the blood in hundreds of cases. And when you have people out there that say and do out of their lane, that tells us all we need to know about that individual. And this is what Nanos does. And he does it constantly. This guy is he's worked every crime in the book. It's almost like, watch this. It's almost like he's an Eagle Scout, that he's got all these merit badges. Every one of these guys get all these merit badges, and they know so much. And, look at it all. Look at his stars up there. Okay. When that starts to happen in these kind of scenarios, it becomes so problematic that we find ourselves in the situation even today where he's counseling a supervisor on the board. Now, some people get mad at me, they throw shade at me because I say things like this, right? Well, that's because I'm honest. Let's just call it the way it is. Because Nancy Guthrie is still out there, and you have hundreds of volunteers willing to step up and start doing things. And the sheriff is saying, no, thanks, we don't need you. We've got it all under control. Well, the sheriff said that in the very beginning. And guess what? It's not under control. That's why they formed an organized task force. So why is this important to discuss, this next piece of where this investigation goes? It's important to discuss because in order to make sense of this, okay, you have to understand this. Because he can either make or break an investigation that will impact that. And when we think about the totality of what this guy said and when he said it years ago when he was looking for the job, remember we did a whole show on why it was dangerous for the sheriff to be involved in this thing in any way, shape, or form. And, we talked about as a panel his past, we talked about, where he came from, why he was suspended. Remember, this guy beat a handcuffed prisoner in the back of a patrol car and put him in the ICU, the intensive care unit. Okay. Anybody that defends this guy, and they were a former law enforcement or are law enforcement, you need to hang up your shield. Because the only reason this guy was not put into prison and a grand jury come back with a true bill is because the suspect that he beat was also a robbery suspect. And that suspect's attorney would not let him testify against Nanos in the grand jury. And the reason for that is because if he would have implicated himself in the robbery, then he could also have been held accountable for that. So theoretically, you could have had both individuals in sharing a jail cell and a prison cell, Nanos and the other guy. And so when we see, these newspaper clippings about a grand jury clears the officer, that's not because he didn't do the activity or the behavior. It's because the guy that they beat the crap out of couldn't testify against him. So that tells us a lot about this guy's personality and why he would attack his own who went against him, including, the POA president, Sergeant Cross, who, in my opinion, has some real chutzpah to come out and kind of defend, Nancy Guthrie, quite frankly. And, the fact that he was a stand-up guy recently, to stand up and say, hey, I made a mistake and I need to clarify it. And he did. That's what a good cop does. Unlike the sheriff today, taking a shot at a board of supervisors. Now, let's compare and contrast here. Sergeant Cross makes a mistake, steps up and says, I made a mistake. Nanos, who was suspended 37 times, ultimately given the choice to resign or get fired. We showed that documentation. And he stands up and says, why did you turn a tip over to the FBI? How dare you? And he attacks the board of supervisors. That's the difference between compare and contrast. When you have a body out there somewhere that may belong to Nancy Guthrie. That's what we're dealing with. So if the sheriff does go, I want the public to understand that the next guy in line in, chain of command will be his deputy sheriff until there's a special election held, potentially. And so what does that really mean? I'm concerned that the next guy, who was also fired for violations of Arizona law and had to come back and fight for his job to get it back, and on technicality, he was given his job back, and Nanos immediately brought him in as the number 2. So let's do the math, folks. If Nanos is gone, hypothetically, then the next guy coming in is another individual who is a mini-me of Nanos. So I'm trying to make a case for a federal oversight and take over this investigation. Now, the only way that can happen right now under these circumstances, until the new election takes place, a special election, I think we're going to be, and this is, I just think we're going to be in a scenario where the second guy takes over if Nanos is booted. That guy is calling the shots with Nanos about this investigation. And I want to clarify so everybody understands. Okay? If that happens, then Nanos hasn't lost any advantage, because the second guy is basically a carbon copy and can say and do the exact same things. And you can bet he's going to appoint a third guy under him, an undersheriff, if those dominoes fell. That is going to be just like him, another yes man. Now, that's a political nightmare for Nancy Guthrie. So I'm hoping and want to plea with the sheriff, if he's listening, that if you are asked to step down, that as a gentleman, you step away and then you assign the FBI jurisdiction over this investigation. Not just this idea of saying, yeah, we have a task force, working with the FBI. No. Give up the investigation, even if it's a homicide. Turn it over to the FBI and let the task force with their own case agent pick up these pieces and run. Now, I'm not saying that the guys and gals on the ground aren't doing that in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking about releasing jurisdictional authority over this case and handing it to the field office there in Phoenix. That's what I'm asking tonight. Because all of this other stuff is noise that is getting in the way, which we were afraid would happen early on when this thing kicked off. So I think the public is going to ask the sheriff at some point there, please do the right thing. The other day, when Kash Patel stepped up, and we talked about that the other night, when he stepped up and said, hey, we were there, we were ready to go, and he gave all the other things that they were ready to do. Immediately, the sheriff's id, responded with, yeah, but we've got a guy, we're working with that task force. Well, what he failed to tell everybody, and we talked about this, but I want to reemphasize it. I said, I bet you that guy is a task force member from the Pima County Sheriff's Office. That he referenced to somebody being on the FBI task force as if it was an FBI agent. Well, I've been able to confirm that, in fact, it was just another cross-sworn, cross-trained deputy from the Pima County Sheriff's Office that he was referencing. That's concerning because he's not telling, he's just kind of keeps circumventing around every time he feels, embarrassed or his ego gets bruised, he goes on the attack. I want to know how in the world that is helping Nancy Guthrie. And maybe this is the reason, I got, cantankerous Chris recently, which, by the way, I'm embracing. But you'll notice I actually changed it tonight. We're going to embrace that as well. Okay. I'm cantankerous because the sheriff should do the right thing. And the reason for that is obvious. There is a tremendous amount of work going on behind the scenes. I, in no way, shape, or form, believe that this is a cold case, but I am concerned that it's a political case. And that political aspect of this case is just as damaging as a cold case. Because decisions are being made at one level, i.e., probably on the task force, and then it's coming downstream to the sheriff's office and to the sheriff's desk. If that individual does not like the decisions being made, because they are the case agency, i.e., the house there is in their city, he has input into the decision process. The sheriff does right now. So even though the task force says, okay, we need to do A, B, C, and D, let's move, okay, the sheriff can say yay or nay. That's what's clogging up the wheel. That's what's slowing this investigation down. That's what Kash Patel was talking about. This thing is getting quagmired in political rhetoric. And so the sheriff needs to do the right thing. Now, I may be blowing out a light bulb here by even mentioning this tonight, but I hope I'm not. I'm a very optimistic individual. Ask anybody that knows me, anybody that's known me for years. Greg Cooper's known me over 30 years. He recognizes my frustration about what's going on here. And that's one of the reasons why he's coming on Sunday. Because Nancy Guthrie deserves it. No matter what the answers are, you have to follow the direct evidence. It cannot be political in nature in terms of now decisions being made on the task force. It has to be predicated upon the evidence in front of you, not things that, you make phone calls and, you get, certain positions, i.e., when you get, senators and all these other people who chime in, which I'm not saying it was a bad thing initially, but quite frankly, they should have stayed out of the way. We've hit that horse 50 times, so I'm not going to hit it again tonight at all. But this is the reason why. This is why it's important to keep Nancy first and foremost. This is her blood. Think about that from a political position. This story needs to be told in a nonpartisan, non-political way. It needs to be shared among investigators who have experience, who say, you know what? I see A, B, C, and D. Not other people who, think they see A, B, C, and D. And when I feel sorry for the sergeant who was assigned this case from the get-go, and then the public learns this guy's never worked a homicide case. Now, what if the lead detective walks up into the sergeant's office and puts these photographs on his desk and says, Sarge, what are you seeing here? And he leans back in his chair, or she, whoever, but it's a him in this case. Imagine being the fly on that wall that day. And then leaning back and go, I have no idea. And then leaning forward and say, Sarge, do you see that mat on the floor, on the porch, still there because Fox News is filming it? Yes. Should we go back and get it? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe. And then you have a press conference with the sheriff, his boss, who says, well, yeah, we made a mistake and we'll let the court sort it out. We shut the scene down too early. And when our partners showed up, they wanted to go back and take a look at it. Okay. Now, what that really means is the FBI saw things, their evidence response team. I'm sure the two agents that showed up in that press conference, they're scratching their head going, holy crap, what are we getting into? And they probably went back and tried to do the best that they can. And I'm not saying that the, crime scene investigators didn't do the best that they could. But somebody made a decision to not pick up these items, and the list can go on. We've talked about it, over and over again. And I don't want to, keep drilling into that stuff. But it's important because this guy is probably sitting here tonight watching this program and others that are coming up on a daily basis about Nancy Guthrie. She is still out there. She is still out there. But this guy feels like he's more important than this guy. If we do the math, or this person, if we do the math, if you're from Tucson, in your mind right now, Is this person more important than this person? For me, this person wins. This person wins. Those eyes are much more penetrating and dangerous than these eyes. Behind these eyes is an ego that, quite frankly, you need a handcart to get into the building. Behind these eyes is evil. These eyes are the ones Nancy Guthrie saw. It was her looking up and seeing this set of eyes looking down. It was her terror the night she was abducted that caused her heart and her pacemaker to spike. It is her blood on the porch because of this person. This is what it's all about, Sheriff. And I know you've been in this game a very long time, but let's admit it's time to hang up the shield and move on. You've done what you needed to do, and now it's time to give it up and turn it over. Turn it over to the Phoenix office and let the task force 100% do what they need to do. Because you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk that I, quite frankly, have more respect for the fact that you probably don't want to take that risk. Because as this thing starts to heat up, which I believe it will, as the DNA comes in, and hypothetically, they can't identify this guy. I'm going to play hypothetical here for a moment. If they can't identify this guy, they're going to have to make some hard decisions on that task force. And those of you who have been following my channel know that I have at least 50 gaps that need to be answered and filled. And it's going to take a task force or an organized investigative team working in conjunction with each other to do that. This is no longer a one-on-one, let's try to get there scenario. This is a very intense investigation where cars need to be identified, where statements need to be verified, where recanvassing needs to occur, where you start from page 1 and video 1 on all body camera and backwards in all initial interviews, from the church people to the family to the gardener, the pool man, etc. You start at square one, because if they're only waiting for the DNA, that is 100% a mistake. That is 100% a mistake. You have got to continue with this investigative process. And then when the DNA comes back, it is a bonus to the investigation. It's a bonus. Because what we're seeing already is $1.2 million has not motivated anyone to pick up the phone and say, hey, I know who did this. I want to tell you what the person's name is. Now, there's been a lot of people that have called and have said, hey, I have information. It's my brother or my stepbrother, etc. And I need to tell you about this, etc. All of those individuals need to be interviewed and flushed through the funnel. And if there's anything left that comes out of the bottom, then you can utilize that in an investigative analysis process. But it all needs to be flushed out, and that takes manpower, a lot of it. One of my concerns is, now that we're at 101 days, is if they're just waiting for the DNA to come back, hypothetically, which I hope they're not, then they're going to move on to other cases. They don't have a choice. And then when the DNA comes back, they're going to pop the can open, and they're going to open it up again. That's if the sheriff's department's involved. If the FBI is involved, they're going to keep running because they have a lot of resources. And that's when the sheriff's department can narrow the scope down to maybe one or two people, experienced homicide guys, to run in parallel together in formation as a task force. Albeit, though, with many more resources with the FBI. We're at that juncture. And it's time that gets focused. Because what will happen is the feds will also have to make decisions. And those decisions could be drastic, meaning they step back and say, you know what, we've got to get on with other work here. You guys have 5 people that are working on this, and they reshift it back to the Pima County Sheriff's Office. So far, I'm batting 1,000 on these principles. If the feds get fed up, no pun intended, they pull back resources because they've done all that they can do. Remember, we showed that press conference, and the sheriff said in a couple of ways, these are the lanes that you need to stay in. And then the FBI guy steps up and he says, we are participating in this role, mostly support. And then he talked about, evidence processing if necessary, the CAS team, and he went down the list. Okay, when they sent the BAU early on this thing, when it was a kidnapping problem. All of these things presented themselves rapidly, and they were ready to go. But you had one individual who stood at that podium and said, look at me. I'm just going to shoot from the hip. And I'm going to tell you what we're doing. Because I've got the greatest team in the world, and I'm sure he's got great people. But I also know that he gutted his people. And he didn't have the A team there in totality. Now, I'm sure they're good investigators. But you do not want to learn how to investigate this type of crime on the job training. So what he really did, and quite frankly, I don't think the media held him accountable because it's a local media market and they don't want to tick him off. Because if they do, then he's not going to answer any questions the next time around because they've probably learned he's that kind of guy. I know there's a Fox reporter down there. Do your job. Don't critique us out here. Go sit down with the sheriff and ask him the hard questions. Ask him why he said 11 a.m. and that they actually got there a little earlier. Ask the doggone questions. Don't blame other people. Do your job. Or are you afraid of this guy? I'm not concerned with this guy because this guy was almost indicted by a grand jury for beating the crap out of a prisoner. He needs to be held accountable. And what do we get years later? What we get is 101 days later, he stands in front of the Board of Supervisors and he chastises one of the Board of Supervisors for turning in a tip about this guy. Do your job, Phoenix market, media, mainstream media. Do your job. Nancy Guthrie deserves it. Don't just ask him how's it going and let him drive away in a $70,000 Corvette. Hit him with the hard questions. Hit him with it. Because he's a boxer. He'll punch back if he needs to. It needs to happen. Because we're at 101 days now. The ongoing investigation and the DNA analysis has not come back. And there's still $1.2 million sitting there for somebody to come collect. For somebody to come collect. And I think we still need to pay attention to three people. The first one is the guy driving the Range Rover. They impounded that car for a reason. I'm not saying the guy's involved in any way, shape, or form. He stepped up and said, look, I don't know what you guys are talking about. However, I've seen things in my time as well as others that wouldn't surprise me. The fact that they took the car is a problem. The second is the fact that they took another car that belonged to the family. That's a problem. And again, it goes towards 50 gaps that need to be answered, that things need to be answered. We did a whole show on it the other night. 50 Ways to Leave Your Mother. And then the other situation is the young lady that may have some association here down the line. And then the third one is there somebody that could have been brought into the circle that's in association with the other circles? Like Knucklehead here in Hawthorne, or with people within the first circle, because this case screams, in my opinion, the reason you wear a mask is to logically hide your identity. Well, why would he have to hide his identity if he knows he's taken her out of that house? And there's so much sophistication around the Bitcoin, not tracing it, etc. Well, a logical, critical thinking conclusion would be the reason you cover your face is because you are known to the victim, potentially. That person could recognize you. Or that person could recognize you through other associations that they may have seen you hanging out with. Somebody knows this guy or person, whoever this is. Somebody knows this person. Somebody recognizes these eyes. Somebody understands who this person is. And Nancy may have even known, or, it may be, one of the things we do when we go into a crime scene is when you sit there, when everything has been pulled out, all the evidence has been collected, bagged and tagged, and we think about the totality of what's going on, and you sit there and you absorb the scene, and you start picking up these idiosyncrasies in the scene, like like we talked about the wreath on the wall on the front porch. We talk about the doors and all the things that we've gone over here on this channel. We ask ourselves these questions, about why is this person trying to, do what they do? But you see, that's the how. That's how did this crime occur? How did that blood get there? All of that. When our clarity of focus in totality should always be about the why, right? Why did the suspect pick this victim? Why this time of night? Why that day? What's the triggering aspect of that particular day? Why wear a mask? Why do the pre-surveillance? Okay. And once you ask all of these kind of why questions, the hows and the whos and the whats, all of that starts to present itself in an investigative analysis aspect. Okay. And they call it CIA, criminal investigative analysis, CIA. Okay. Not the CIA. That's just the terminology, or, anyway, so that all of these answers start to present themselves. And if you know what you're doing in a war room, you have all of these sheets of paper up on the wall, and, you're writing down all of these answers, what are coming to the team as there's this exploratory process that takes place where there's no ego in the room. Everybody is throwing at the wall their own opinions. And you figure out the rights and wrongs later on. But when you're initially doing all of this, it's about that guy right there. But more importantly, it's about your victim, Nancy. And that's why in the 10 filters of profiling, the very first filter is victimology. You are learning everything that you can about victimology, meaning about Miss Guthrie, learning her patterns of life, learning her girlfriends, learning her family members. And then you expand out from the victim to just those people. And you learn about their patterns of life. You learn about all of their, idiosyncrasies. And then from there, you expand out into the neighborhood and you learn about the neighbors, abandoned residences behind the house, dogs that are making noise in the middle of the night. All of these are answers to the why, and they start presenting themselves. And that's how an investigation starts to gain momentum. And then there are very glaring inconsistencies within that process that present themselves that are so obvious. You cannot go from one domino to the next. You can't skip and jump over a domino. You have to resolve why this domino is in front of you. Why these data points aren't making sense. Why this, trip to the gas station to collect video. All of these whys have to now start, you have to plug them. You have to plug the holes. Because that then tells you, okay, we have a cistern that has water in it, but there are holes in that cistern. So you've got to fill those holes, and the investigation becomes the water. It starts to fill itself automatically. And eventually you have this, analogy of the cistern that is full. And that is the full cistern that you take to the U.S. Attorney's office or you take to the district attorney's office and you say, here it is. And then they step out and say, well, I want to see it. And they make a scene visit. And Fox News just happens to be there with a drone overhead. And they come in and they start processing in their own mind, how will a jury see this? How will a grand jury see this? How will ultimately, 12 people that had to give up their life for, probably a very long time in this case, how are they going to see this? And so they have to start connecting those dots visually and on the scene, but they're visualizing it in a courtroom. And these are all processes that have to take place without the interference of anybody like this. In a courtroom, a jury doesn't care if you have 16 stars on your body. Actually, 17 with the badge, now that I notice it. Think about that for a moment. 17 stars on this guy's uniform. And then he's also got his little salad bar over here. Is that any different than my son's Eagle Scout? He's got all of that stuff. And what's he projecting there? That's power that he's projecting there. Look at me. You don't have this. I do. Well, I don't care about that. I care about this. Because this guy looked at Nancy and may have said, "Look at me. You're going to do what I say." It was these eyes, again, to remind everybody, right? All of us, but more importantly, I'm talking to the sheriff. It's these eyes that count. Not your stars. You're not the star. You are no longer the star in this movie of life. Savannah Guthrie and her family deserve to know who this person is. And at the very end of that, maybe one day you'll be able to pat yourself on the back and say, "Look what my team did." But until that time, you're running out of time. And the longer it takes, the more emboldened the suspect gets. That they are making progress away from the investigation. Away from the investigation. What say you? Thank you. If the Guthrie investigation leads to no arrests and case goes cold, does that mean the 911 call and body cam footage will never be released to public? They would have to keep it under the umbrella of this is an ongoing investigation. If they cannot justify that, i.e., the case has been suspended and put on the shelf, because that's what we would call it, that the case has been suspended, they would have to release the 911 and maybe the body camera footage. But if it's still part of an ongoing investigation, they can stonewall, which, by the way, the sheriff's department has a history of. They could stonewall it to the public under the guise of it's an ongoing investigation. Hopefully that doesn't work that way. With the scene compromised, how important is it going to be to find evidence outside of the scene for any trial to come? That is a great question, Real Mikey. All right, so there's two things that could happen, in my opinion. The evidence that they recovered under the search warrant before they released the crime scene, that could all come in under direct evidence for the trial. Okay, that shouldn't be an issue. Now, there's going to be some hearings, as we all know. There's going to be pretrial hearings, and the defense is, going to stand up and they're all going to argue, which is great because that's how it works under the Constitution. Okay. I don't see any real problems right now with that evidence. But the moment that scene was turned over back to the family and released, from the sheriff's department, i.e., they release custody, the chain of custody to that crime scene, it's anybody's guess how many wins the defense will get in pretrial hearings. So let's say the FBI gets that evidence of the video after the scene was released. There is a high probability a good defense attorney will argue that's what they call fruit of the poisonous tree. That, it was compromised And they're always going to argue that it could have been tampered with. You know, they'll probably play the video of the journalist walking up on the porch, you know, taking pictures. They'll probably, you know, argue in their briefs that, look, there was even pizza being delivered. Even though, you know, you got to give JLR credit. That guy works like a machine. Okay. And, you know, it is what it is. They'll argue those kind of things. And so, will some of it get tossed out? It's possible. What we can hope for is they had custody of that camera within the first 48 hours under the control and dominion and control of that initial crime scene and search warrant. If not, it's up for grabs, Mike. And the defense could grab it and get it tossed. Thank you for your question. I haven't left the house yet. No. I don't think anybody's left the house, right, Larry? And thank you always for being here. I don't know if we can leave the house yet. And the reason for that, in my mind, is because the suspect came to the house. This is so rare, this incident, to show up and then take, you know, somebody out of that home, not, you know, just do what you needed to do in that home. And the fact that they're concealing their face like that, you know, that tells us that individual was really lowering their risk, right? They're probably not very sophisticated, but they're a combination of sophistication. What I mean by that is this guy's not that dumb, because we're at 101 days and we're still talking about him. I'm not of the camp, you know, that he's been hurt or he's no longer with us, because that takes the secondary risk now into 2 murders potentially. And, you know, let's use Michael Vaughn as a perfect example. The initial assessment of Michael Vaughn was that was a walk away. It's a walk away. The child walked away and he disappears. Okay. That's kind of like the same scenario here. Initially, this idea presented itself as that was a possibility, and the police were thinking that. The family was saying no, yes, no, but we think it's more potentially of a medical event, and they were calling the hospitals, all of that stuff. Okay. As you've heard me say, the timeline is screwed up for all of that. Okay. But there was some miscommunication potentially, you know, going on. So they treated it as, in their minds, well, you know, we deal with this all day. There's blood on the porch. Maybe, you know, she did walk away. But then there's this contradicting statement from the sheriff that says, well, we knew immediately that it was a crime scene. So to me, again, that's one of these 50 gaps that needs to be filled in relationship to understanding what the totality of what was really going on that day, that morning. Okay? Because if we look at the timeline in, you know, New York, that church service has already been completed. And then, so at some point, what's the habit of all the girlfriends getting together with Nancy for everybody to watch the church service on Sunday morning around 11? Well, does that mean Nancy drives over to her girlfriend's house? So that means she takes time. She's got to get up by 9 or 8:30, get ready. And then she's got to be over there by 11. So that means she's got to get in her car or get an Uber, whatever, however the mode of transportation is. And we don't know what that piece of the puzzle is yet. Again, more gaps that need to be filled. We just can't presuppose that 11 a.m. comes and the girlfriends call and say, Nancy, where are you? What's going on? We're texting. Okay. Because I'm assuming everything's in place on Sunday mornings, the mimosas are made, the chips are out, the cheese and crackers are sitting there, and they're all in church. Okay. Well, that means Nancy has a routine. And they have a routine because they've been doing this for so long together as girlfriends and friends. Like my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law's been in a book club for 56 years. In a book club. And, hi, Carol. She never misses. But she has a whole routine to get ready for the book club, and boom, she's off to the book club. She has a driver that takes her to the book club. Well, is that what Nancy's routine is? And if so, guess what? That 11 moves way back to maybe 10:30. And the journalists out there need to ask these questions. And that's what I was talking about earlier. The journalists that I used to go up against, they'd be just peppering you with, well, wait a minute, you say 11, but did she have to prepare to come to this? Okay. You'll notice when they did start asking the hard questions, Nanos is so used to controlling the media in that media market. He even said, those of you who know me know I'm not good at scripting. Well, guess what that tells us? That guy says whatever he wants, when he wants it, and they write it down. And what he's not used to is a national media market, i.e., the Brian Entons of News Nation showing up and saying, well, wait a minute, Sheriff, that diaper stinks. Help me understand that. And those folks came in and start putting pressure on him. And what did he do? He shut down. And who did he go to? He went to his local market and he pushed his narrative. He pushed his narrative. To me, old school journalism is dead. Not at the national level, at the local levels, because they're letting these people control them. And that's wrong. That's wrong. Your job is to ask the hard questions and put them on the spot. Don't worry about the next story. It's coming. God forbid it's another Nancy Guthrie. But at least, push back with this guy. And so, that piece of the puzzle, if the FBI does take over, and that video was before, where I was going, before they shut it down and they handed it over to the feds and said, can you get anything out of this? That evidence will probably still stand. It'll be fought over, but it'll probably still stand. Not heard one Nancy Guthrie friend say something about her. Yeah, and isn't that interesting? Right? That could be maybe the investigators pulling them aside and saying, look, for the integrity of the investigation right now, can we ask you a favor? But at some point, you're going to run out of those mulligans. And those people are going to start thinking about their friend. And they're going to start talking. And when they do, put your seatbelts on. Because that's when other stuff will start coming in that we may or may not like to hear. But it will be necessary to hear it, whatever that is. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate your kindness. Thank you for your honesty and your time tonight. Is it normal to seal 911, not release victimology? Could the silence from FBI be like a lion waiting for its prey to make a move before they pounce? Thornbridge Hill Estate, that is definitely always a possibility that, they're setting the trap and luring this person in. But this person, would you agree or disagree? It's okay. This person here is calculating every move. And I've learned the quieter somebody is, the more dangerous they become. The more manipulating they project. Much more manipulation. And they get dangerous. What information would I release? Well, I would have released day one. I would not have danced around the blood on the porch. I would have, if the PIO came to me and our team and said, "Hey, what do you guys think?" I think we all would have, discussed it. We would have looked at each other and said, "What's your opinion?" We'd gone around the room, and then I would have felt very comfortable about releasing the blood on the porch, not like the sheriff did. I'm not going to confirm or not confirm whether there was, anything on the porch or in the house, out of the house. You have to step up and own it, because eventually the public is going to find out. And that's why you see, other agencies with, unfortunately, they have much more volume. They step up and say, "Look, we have a deceased male in this house. He appears to have been, the victim of a gunshot wound. The autopsy will be performed to, tell us for sure, but that's what it appears at this point. We have some blood evidence, but right now there are other pieces of evidence we don't want to discuss. However, when we do have information, we will discuss it with you." Thank you. Next question, you. And you give the public, "Oh, there's a guy in there with a gunshot wound and he's dead." The reason for that, right, in any case, is people walk by in these kind of things and, they see the guy, just like that picture I showed you in the beginning of the guy laying on the street, and they go, "Oh, that's a guy that was shot." Okay, I'm not going to stand there and say, "No, you're not seeing what you're seeing." That is not going to hurt a interview with the suspect, because he knows he stabbed her or shot her or whatever they did. They know that already. You're not gaining anything from that. Now, the type of weapon, what's the caliber of that weapon? No, I want the suspect to tell me that. Yeah, or if it's a fixed blade weapon, I want to know what kind. I want to know why Brian Koberger used a K-bar knife. Why did you select that knife, Brian? Okay. But I didn't have a problem with them telling the public, "Oh, and by the way, there was a K-bar, or a sheath, a knife sheath found." I wouldn't have said the K-bar. I would have said knife sheath. And we have, gained DNA off of that knife sheath. I wanted that guy, crapping his pants that were coming, because they also make mistakes. They make mistakes. You'll notice before Stacy Wander was arrested, Chief Huff in that press conference stood up there and said, "These are the 4 people that we are working on. We're not saying they're, the guys that did it. We're just saying we want to talk to them more." There's nothing wrong with that in an investigation. Remember back in the day, they still do it in New York. Look at Luigi. They didn't hide anything from the public. They do perp walks with these guys. And the media, leans out and goes, "Why'd you do it?" If you're walking this guy, you want him to say, "Because I was," you go, "Well, they put that one in the coin box because we just hit a home run." Okay. I hope that answered your question. The eyes and mouth are identical to the Google photo of this guy, Daly. Can they use iris identification? There are some science sciences to that. I don't know in totality if this is the type of case that could, you can measure, between the eyes and all this other stuff. There's all kinds of stuff that they have technology for, but I don't know if that can be utilized in this one because they're just off of photos. I think it's imperative that this case have a resolution and a prosecution as elderly population rises. I believe crimes like this will only escalate. Sadly, thank you for your thorough coverage. I love TIR. Thank you, Elaine. We love you too, from our Jersey girl out there. You're awesome. Don't you think it's safe to rule out robbery gone wrong? Yes. I would rule that out is one of the things I would do. Also, burglary gone wrong. Now, is it technically a burglary? Yeah, because anyone who enters a home or a building, it's a building, by the way, under the statute, anyone who enters a building with the intent to commit a theft or a felony has committed burglary. So it's a technicality. And by the way, isn't that interesting that the sheriff's department initially chose that verbiage rather than it was a kidnapping? Well, if nothing's been stolen, yeah, the DA's office or the U.S. attorneys can charge burglary, but that's a lesser included offense to homicide. Ultimately, they're going to charge homicide. Okay? The burglary is just going to be something there as basically a charging enhancement almost. The jury's going to get all these, these orders that they're going to sign. How do you declare? Well, yeah, we found that he did enter with the intent to commit theft or a felony, and the felony being kidnapping. So therefore, yeah, he's guilty of burglary also. Okay. But Lori Vallow committed murder. So did Chad Daybell. Burglary was also charged. But the DA's office didn't come out and say, this is a burglary gone wrong. They said, no, children are missing, and we found them in the backyard, deceased. And we're searching the home, et cetera. And we're exhuming the body of Chad's wife. That's how you go about this. Do you think it's safe to rule out robbery gone wrong? Yes. Or maybe Nancy surprised him. I think Nancy was surprised, not that she surprised him. He surprised her. Due the time at night it happened, he knew she was there. Well, we're not, right? I agree with you, Knitting Kittens. What a great name. But we don't know. There are still two questions that need to be answered that have not been answered. Was this perpetrator already in the house and waiting for her? Did she make it back to the house? None of that has been answered yet. And this is one of the reasons why I also have not left that house. I've stayed at that house for a reason, for many reasons. Because from that house is the last proof of life. Either it's the Uber driver or it's the son-in-law who drops her off at the house. Those are the last two people, i.e., and also the daughter, if she went over there to hang out. Those are the three people that last saw her alive. The Uber driver, the daughter, and the son-in-law. No matter how you slice it, unless there's other people we don't know about, right now publicly, that's the only information that we have. So that's how we have to measure the information being presented to the public. So what the sheriff needs to do is step up, and rather than just say it's cruel and inhumane and all this other stuff, well, tell the public why. Tell the public why. Don't just say it's cruel and inhumane. What's cruel and inhumane is you beating the crap out of prisoners. That's cruel and inhumane. And your local media should press you on that. Your local media should press you on why the FBI hasn't said that. That's what you should be pushing back on the sheriff and saying, well, the FBI hasn't said that. Can you tell me why, Sheriff? Well, I don't want to talk about that. Okay, then I'll go ask the PIO at the FBI what they think. Well, they're not in charge of this investigation. Okay, then you tell me why. Why is that? Why do we have to listen to the POA president, come out and tell us all these things about your past history, who, by the way, is a good guy. He's a great guy. And quite frankly, I wish he was the sheriff. I'm voting for Cross if I could. I don't know about you guys. Scotland, thank you so much. Adria, yes, thank you. On Twitter, the great gal. I'm at the image of January 11th. So Nancy never got the image notification. And if so, she never reported to family or LE. I'm crying foul. Great point. You know where I'm at to that point, and I appreciate you putting that up. Where I'm at is still the cameras not in the neighborhood. If this was my case, I would be going out here now and compressing into the neighborhood. And we talked about this a little bit, a couple of times, because that suspect, if this person took all of these risks to keep bringing cars in, because we have to presuppose she was taken out by a vehicle, that's the most logical. Or you've eliminated that by looking into the septic system and the cistern in the backyard and all that stuff. Or she could be within a mile and a half of the residence. That area needs to be thoroughly flushed out again. Okay? And just one of the things, I mean, we had a streamer recently, find these bones, right? Remember? And they became they were old archaeological, bones from back in the day. Okay? Well, that tells us how difficult it would be to find Nancy Guthrie. If those bones are sitting there for hundreds of years and they'd never been found, and now all of a sudden, this fine gentleman comes across them and goes, wow, look, I've got something. And then they call out everybody, the anthropologist, and everybody gets up there and they go, hey, these are human bones. But yeah, guess what? They're 240 years old. Imagine trying to find something 100 days old. That's the magnitude of why it's important to keep the search teams working out there. And if you've got a group of searchers that want to, jump in, then organize it from the search and rescue team. Have somebody from the search and rescue team keep doing it and let them keep going. Okay? Every single weekend for 2.5 years, and the reason I brought up the Maya Maletti case in the beginning, for two reasons. One, Larry Maya Maletti is on trial. They're picking a jury, God willing. But her family never gave up for 2.5. They were out every weekend with teams of searchers. I went on some of those searches with these amazing people. I mean, and they're amazing people. They want to help. They want to be engaged. Okay. Let them do it. You have nothing to lose. If anything, they flag it, right? We used to call flag and tag. Don't touch it. If you find it, just flag it. Notify your, person from the law enforcement agency that's helping to oversee this. And, they'll collect it. They'll bring their evidence folks in and collect it and let it be. Go to the next one, go find something else. And, instead he does a 24, 48-hour search with an Esri app that shows, all the places that they searched on the map. Okay, that's great. That's good stuff. Okay. But did you find her? Oh, you didn't. Did you find the 240-year-old bones? Oh, you missed those too. Okay. Well, guess what? Keep going. Keep going. She could be right under everybody's nose. Those bones were. And this is, thinking outside of the box, and let it keep flowing. Let it keep moving. Nancy deserves it. Nancy deserves it. Savannah deserves it. Her family deserves it. Why do I think friends do not talk to the media? because I think they may have been asked, just kind of, can you work with us here for a little bit longer? I have asked witnesses that, please don't discuss this. I can't tell you not to do it. That's what you have to say as an investigator, especially if you think it's a homicide. I can't tell you not to talk to the media, but I would like to ask you your cooperation. And then at some point, the phone will ring. I mean, I've had witnesses call me, say, hey, I'm getting pounded over here. At least can I say my piece? And hopefully you have a good relationship where, you can kind of talk them out of it again. But, it's anybody's guess. Interesting on your show yesterday, the observation of how 9/11 was really already called before Savannah was notified by family, yet how others earlier reports allude to how politicians got called before 9/11. Confusing. Yeah, I think we all forgot, and thank you for that comment. I think we all forgot the very first 9/11 call would have been Nancy herself calling. If it was a medical assistance problem, she would have called 911 and said, hey, I need help here. If the narrative is, well, we thought she took an Uber, really? You got to put that in the bucket that says all the crap goes here. Okay. And then because that's not what her girlfriends thought. Their girlfriends were smart enough to pick up the phone and call her phone and then text her, say, hey, are you coming? What's going on? And by the way, I think common sense would tell us we have to work on this idea that she was getting prepared to go over to the church thing, that she just didn't leave the house at 11. Remember, it started at 11. So how long does it take to get to the girlfriend's house? That's part of the timeline that's missing before they started getting worried that she wasn't showing up. And so if it's 11 or let's say 5 till, you can assume, let's say 10 till, let's say 2 minutes till. Nancy, are you coming? Nancy, I always like calling the water bottle like Get Smart, Agent 99, his shoe. Do. Nancy, are you coming over? Hello? Wow, we're not getting any answer. What do we do? What do you think we should do? I'm going to text Annie. Tick, 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 tick. Hey, your mom's not here yet. What do you mean my mom's not there yet? Yeah. I'll call you back. I'm going to check on her. Now, how much time do you think it takes to go 4 miles? Or let's build in hesitation. I'm going to call mom. Mom? Well, I'm not getting an answer either. Tommaso? Yeah. Mom's not at church. What? What are you talking about? She's not there. I just got a text message from whoever, Judy, hypothetically. It's not her name. What do you mean? Let's go check on her. Everybody in. Are we to presuppose, well, you know what? I got 56 minutes here. Ready, set, go. Let's get there. Okay, where are we? I don't know. Call all the hospitals. We got 7 minutes to do that. Okay. So I'm of the camp right now that gap, which I talked about, still kind of feels fishy to me. I don't know. It just feels squishy. Okay. Now, could there be an answer for that? Sure. But I want to know, if I was the case agent, I'd want to know, well, what time did you get a call? Can I see your phone? Yeah. All right, I see that. Oh, well, yeah, she texted you at, let's see here, 9:01. You texted her back at 9:02. How long did it take you to go from point A to point B? You're at the house here. Oh, maybe a couple minutes, 10 minutes. Okay, that's 9:11. I'm just hypothesizing these time frames, but I'm keeping it realistic, right? Okay. It took you 11 minutes. And then what did you do when you got here? And that's where the narrative. Well, we got here and the doors were propped open. We searched around, we walked outside, we looked in the neighborhood. We couldn't find mom. We thought maybe there was a medical event. Okay. And then what happened? We called 911. All right. You see how these things, because this is how it happens. I've been to hundreds, if not thousands of calls in my career, of law enforcement where you get their cover on a medical aid and you show up and you're talking to the RP and the RP says, yeah, I found him in the bathroom, and he was unconscious. Okay. And you get on the radio and say, station O or station Z, whatever it is, what was the time of call here? Oh, the TOC was, blah, blah, blah. And you can go back to your CAD in your car and you can look and see the CAD note printout. Okay. And by the way, have you noticed none of that information's been released to the public? Put that in the bucket of this is where the crap goes. Okay. There's a prize here. Something in there. Okay. So these things for me, become, somewhat challenging. And I'm sure every one of us is having, this problem, right? This should have been elevated case from the go. Yep. When you are offered resources above your own that are not taken, agree, ask harder questions. Absolutely, Vet Girl. It's great to see you, by the way. So always appreciate your insight. Sheriff, if you're watching, do the right thing. Thank you, it's Elise. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely do the right thing. Hopefully he doesn't get a spot at CrimeCon. It almost seems as if the sheriff does not want this case solved. Kathy, I mean, it doesn't it feel that way, but let's hope that's really not his intent. I think his ego, Star Wars is what we'll call him. I think Star Wars here is more concerned with his Mr. T starter kit there on his uniform and his ego than he is with this guy. I think that's what's probably happening here. Compare Columbus Double H to this case. Info released early transparency and claim going into trial. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. The Tepe case, they got right up and said, boom, we had a doctor that drove 300 miles and he whacked his ex-wife. And by the way, he's a nut job. How do I sound like you can get called to help? Will it make a difference? Thank you for your valuable insight. Beacon of hope. I think as long as the public keeps the pressure on them, something's going to happen. I know that the Board of Supervisors is trying to make it, right. And that's the whole purpose of tonight's, show this evening. But I was a little concerned again when we learned that he gets up there and he starts chastising, a Board of Supervisor. For what? For calling in a tip to the FBI? Are you serious? Because it didn't go through him? Come on. Would cameras above guest house catch T dropping NG off? I understand this was a camera on the guest house, but I may be wrong. I don't know what the scope of the angle of those lenses could be, but let's hope there's a lot more forensic digital evidence. Does it appear to circle around to the house? Yes. So far, we can't not leave that home. Not yet. And then what you can do is work from the outside in looking for a vehicle. But remember, if there's a vehicle from the outside, it had to get to the home. And that means it's easier to find it out there on the other camera systems, which they're going through, I guarantee it, There's a couple of camera systems. One of them is called Brief Cam that you can plug and play all this other data that you're looking for. Maybe you have this anomaly of like a Range Rover, a gray Range Rover. You can type in this camera, in this system. And by the way, it was just purchased by Axion. So they just did an acquisition. So there's another name for it. But what you can do is you could type in gray Range Rover. Okay. This system is an AI generated system. It will go through any data that is fed into it. So let's say you have all the camera systems through the Flock system, F-L-O-C-K. There are Flock cameras all over that Pima County and Tucson area. They're all over the place out there. And so you take that data, insert it into this other system called BriefCam, and it's the same. Remember during the Las Vegas shooting, all those rounds going off, okay? And they had to figure out, okay, where'd those rounds go? Oh, it was BriefCam, that system, that AI system, that showed them exactly where those rounds were and how many there were. And it probably took them an hour and a half to get to that information. So when I first heard, the sheriff say, well, we got 100,000 cars to go through. Okay, what's your point? Because these systems can narrow it down to a couple hours. And guess what? You have that information in a couple hours, a la a gray Range Rover potentially getting stopped and impounded with evidence tags on it. Ta-da. Okay. That could be one of those systems that they're not talking to us about. The sheriff's not putting it out there. Thank you so much. I tell you, we've got the best group of people. Thank you guys so much for supporting our channel. Karen and I are so appreciative of each and every one of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm with you, Chris. I'm still there at the house too. I really appreciate your time and calm wisdom throughout this case. If this tragedy ever happened to my own family, I would pray for an investigator exactly like you. Well, you are very, very kind. Thank you, Esmeralda 456. I hope nothing like this ever happens to you. Any one of us. This is the worst case scenario. Well, losing a child, I think, is pretty rough too. Could the blood pattern be caused by because compression was picked up by picking up a body? Also, could the 11:56 time be from the garage door opening? The blood on the porch, I think it's been, discussed in many different ways. I'm of the camp that this to the upper right potentially could be aspiration. I don't know that for sure. It does look like, an impact of some sort in the middle because there's much more, concentration. But it's got a lighter spray around it, which would be consistent with, aspiration blood. But the only way definitively to say that is you swab it. And if there's, some type of saliva or lung fluid or anything from the mouth in that blood, then that will definitively say yes. The other stuff is 90-degree satellite, meaning something was there over it. I've heard different things. Could be a nose, could be a face, could be an ear. I don't know. I've seen it 1,000 different ways from different parts of the body. If you say that's a nose and then, you get to the suspect and the suspect says, yeah, her ear was bleeding. Well, guess what? You're wrong. Okay. So I don't guess at that stuff. I do say that's a 90-degree drop, meaning it's straight down. I also say some of that is satellite, meaning it's blood that drops within the blood. Boom, boom, and it satellites out. And that's what you get with some of the smaller marks in between. And it also could explain some of the hollow points within inside of that blood. But there could be a secondary reason for the hollow point within inside of that blood. What I mean by that is this area here where it's clearer, okay, and you can see the tile through it. That could also be caused from a swab from the evidence technician. They lean down and they swab it in the middle, and then they package that. So I don't know what that means. I've always been concerned, and I was one of the first ones to point this out on YouTube. If you go back and watch one of my very first videos on this case, the first thing I said is this debris is over the top of this blood. Now, what does that mean? Is it the wind? Is it the suspect kicking? Is it, is the blood already there when he's there, putting the weeds up and drops it, and we just don't have the exposure on the film to show us? I don't see a pattern there, but again, I'm not a photographer. I'm an investigator. When the experts do their thing and they walk in and they hand you the photographs and say, Mac, look what we found. And John Zlam's wife was one of those people. That girl could find 1,000 things. And you look at her and her name was Joyce. I used to call her Joycer. I said, Joycer, how in the heck did you find this? She goes, magic. And, it's like, wow, okay, this is good stuff. But then, you look at now the video that shows up and the guy's got this stuff in his hand and is still sitting on the porch. Huge mistake. Gigantic mistake now. Okay? That becomes a gigantic mistake. That's why you always take things that DLR doesn't look right. They're anomalies. Why was the Amazon package still there? If pots were used, allegedly in the back doors, why isn't this pot being processed? Why isn't somebody throwing, powder, right? Red wop. Okay. Why aren't they throwing powder on the pots there? Why is the wreath still up on the wall in the front of this home when he's grabbing reeds? Does he not see the wreath? What's going on with all of this stuff? Why is the mat not collected even to this day? Guess what? If there's blood there could be blood on the mat. What if it's his blood? What if he was cut as well as her and we just don't see it yet? Okay. These are the kind of things that, in my opinion, are going to come back and bite this investigation. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope I'm wrong for Miss Guthrie's sake. I hope 1,000% I am totally off base. But I think there's also another side of me, and I think you folks probably agree that we're probably not wrong on this one. But the fact that stuff's still sitting there is very problematic for an investigation like this. Okay? And here's the wreath that I was talking about. Here to the left, everybody see that? Why does this guy turn around and grab the weeds when he's got a device right here that he could just hang on this thing? He could just hang it right there. Okay. And, problem solved. Problem solved. Why do you got to turn around and make it look like, well, I guess I'll just go ahead and pick up the wreath, or pick up the weeds. Well, why are you doing that, Sherlock? You got a doggone wreath right here. You're looking at it. And, everybody talks about the business card, from the Adult Protective Service, right? APS. We've all looked at that business card, and you're right. That's a great question. Does the call come in the next day and they run out there to cover their tush? Or did they have something in the in basket that, a Nancy Guthrie, and they're going through their stuff and say, oh, crap, I've got a referral on this. I better jump on this thing and get out there. All of that could be in play. Any piece of that we're talking about here, collectively as a group, that could all be in play. Okay. But I think we would all agree until we can't leave the house until these kind of things are resolved, these things. Lily B, in my opinion, not surprised if Nancy was already injured before she was brought back to home. Uh, a warning, but perhaps she was already hurt, abused, and covered up to cover her medical attention off records. Home went wrong. Just a theory. That is a possibility. Anything is possible. You know, the one thing that really struck me, and we talked about it as a group the other night, was her Medicare card. You know, she's 84 years old. She's on, Medicare, Medicaid. She had to have that card with her to go to the hospital. She had to have ID to go with her to the hospital. So that immediately in my head took the paramedics out of the scenario. Forget the fact that the cops right there can just pick up the radio and say, do we have any medical events here? That would have answered it like this. And the fact that messaging was sent to her sister, 3,000 miles away in New York from Arizona. We thought it was a medical event. Well, I'm calling the hospitals. Where did that narrative come from? How does that narrative fit in the totality of this problem? I mean, am I off base, guys? Don't you guys think and feel that just doesn't jive with if this was your mom? I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but my experience has told me read a lot into these things. And once I do that, it's like, okay, I gotta knock this domino over to hit the next domino. And because that's when they all start falling. They all just start collapsing. Okay. And I've shared this story, a funny story. I arrested a math professor at UCSD one time. And I had him in the interview room, and long story short, when we were all done, he copped out to what he had done. And I was leaning back, waiting for him to say something. Silence in an interview room is just so powerful, right? And we did that the other night on the phone call stuff, right? For 56 minutes. Imagine 56 minutes of pure silence. That's very powerful stuff. So anyway, this guy sitting across from me, and finally, after about a minute or so, about a minute and a half, becomes so uncomfortable. He leans over to me and he goes, he said, "Detective, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Absolutely, sir. And I appreciate your honesty, by the way, on this." He goes, yeah, I know. He said, but how did you know? And I looked at him and I said, I did the math. I hooked him up. The guy went off into the atmosphere, and you could just see this whole look of, oh crap, And I mean, this guy's a professor teaching mathematics at UCSD. He did something really stupid, and a knucklehead like me, turns it on him and just puts it right back at him and says, hey, we just did the math. Well, I'm pulling this off, these kind of idiosyncrasies, and even asking myself, well, the math isn't mathing sometimes. And I hope I'm wrong. Again, I'm willing to say, you know what? I was wrong on that one. Okay. We'll see what happens. Wish you were on this case. Thank you, Lissy. I'm glad I'm not on this case, to be honest with you, because I think, I would have been really frustrated with some of the things that I'm seeing. Seems weird. A would delay call to Savannah. Savannah mentioned it was evening as she had been at Carson's house and got home and met up with her husband. New York was 2 hours ahead. So I'm guessing A called late afternoon Tucson time. Yeah, that great point. It does now. The math does not mathin'. Do you know NG is unalived and where she is, but cannot say due to investigation of suspect would needed searches? I do not know where she's at. I, like you, Becky, I wish I did. I am of the opinion, and this is only my opinion, that she is not with us. This amount of time, it's not like an Elizabeth Smart thing where Elizabeth Smart was kept alive because of sexual gratification. That's why Elizabeth Smart is alive, because the suspect continued to abuse her. Nancy Guthrie is not alive, in my opinion, because we would have had a proof of life shortly thereafter her abduction. Maybe all cars in the camera are actually from her neighborhood. Do we know if that has been checked? It probably has, Situ. And that's why they're expanding out those dates, because I think they're trying to find what comes in versus what went out. Been here since day one. I just don't talk much. Thanks, Sinus Mom 9. Thank you so much for being here since day one. Wow. My brother drives for Uber and said she may have regularly driven on Sundays since she was a rural resident. She may have been worried and called for a check. Okay. Yeah, I think she may have driven over to her girlfriend's as well. But, we need to have them start giving us some information on that. And that also may be a good thing that they're not talking, because that may give us some insight that they may be getting closer to making an arrest. I'll guarantee you, the moment that happens, I'll be up live and holding my breath like everybody else to find out who it is. Okay. And it could be anybody. It really could be. But we're going to see who they hook up. And the other interesting part, that I'm going to get a bag of popcorn. Who's going to announce it? Who's going to be at the presser? I wonder if the sheriff doesn't let go. I think he's going to have, maybe one guy from the FBI there. And that's going to tell you everything you need to know. If they solve this thing, i.e., they find the body or whatever, and they twist it, meaning they interview and they get what they need, I don't know if he will invite them as a payback. I think he's that vindictive, based on what I've heard, what I've experienced, who I've talked to, what I know about these kind of people, because I've worked for them before. Okay? They're very vindictive. And by the way, those of you that don't know, I was also the chairman of our Police Officers Association, kind of like Cross. I was Cross in my agency. And man, it got stinky sometimes. We'll have to do another show on that one day. Chances of accidentally passing of Nancy and subsequent attempt to hide it via stage, ransom note, etc., that's a possibility. Yes, that is a possibility. But they took that chance when they removed her from the residence. They took the chance. The suspect took that chance. Okay. Thank you, Sherry. All right. I've had you here for 2 hours. Thank you all so much for always being with us. We've got a great program coming on Sunday. Do not miss Sunday night. It's going to be a barn burner. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have the man himself, Greg Cooper, from the BAU here. And that guy's got some insight, I think, that's going to really light this thing up. So in the interim, check this out. I am Good-Natured Chris. Please like, subscribe, hit that bell so that every time we go up, you get notified. If you find it in your heart, please do that. And when I talk about nanos, I can be cantankerous, Chris. But for our audience, I'm the other guy. Thank you guys always so much. Continue to keep the faith, Keep Nancy in your prayers. In Hawaii, be akamai. To our mods, to our members, to our subscribers, thank you so much. To our members, not only on Patreon, but here on YouTube. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And God bless you. Please pass this around to everybody, and let's keep the faith. Aloha. See you on the next one.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a